Hey guys, welcome back to Algos Explained. My name is David, and today we're going to go over an algorithm question. This question was sent over by viewer uh, Idris. I hope I'm saying that right, but thanks for the question. And before we get started with this, if anybody else does want me to go over a particular algorithm question, just go ahead and send it over to algosexplained@gmail.com. I'll have that email in the description, but yeah, it's just my channel name at gmail.com, and can't guarantee you that I'll get to it uh, in the next video, but hopefully I will be able to, and hopefully it'll help you. So let's get right to this. This one is, it says write a function where if the user puts an input 5, it prints this right here, this chunk. And so it seems okay, we're putting in 5 and we're going to print out not only 5 lines, but also 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3s, 4, 4s, and 5, 5s. And he gave me a couple of other examples too. If we had an input 2, we would print out just this chunk, which is the top chunk of that. And if we just had 1, we would have 1. And so before we get started with this, some of the other cases that I might want to ask, maybe if you did get this in an interview situation, you might want to go over some edge cases. Say if I get 0, what would I print out? They might say, okay, print out blank or print out nothing. Just return nothing. And in that case, I would also follow up with, what if I get can I get negative numbers in the inputs? Will it always be positive? And they might say, if it's a negative number, then don't print out anything, again, like the 0 case. Or if it's a negative number, maybe they're going to want to extend it to the point where you start going backwards and start printing out like -2, 2 -2s, 1 -1, and then end there. And so so in another sense, if you were the interviewer too, maybe that, and you want to give this to your candidate, that might be another way to do it. Say they finish this one really quickly. Another way to just kind of see how they tackle a problem if it gets a little bit more complicated is to ask, okay, in a negative situation, can you do this or that? And so, but today's case, we're going to pretend like we're only dealing with positives, and we're going to figure out how to do this. And so when we look at this first, the first thing that comes into my mind is that, okay, we have a pattern here. We're first of all, we're printing these lines, and so each one of these are going to be a console log. And in terms of how many times we print those out, depends on our input. And so in 5, we're printing out 5 times. In 2, we're printing out twice, and 1, we're printing out 1. And so we're not even focused on kind of the lines of printout we're doing yet. We're just focused on, okay, how many times do I follow this process? And given that we do have that input and that directly dictates how many times we follow that, we can we know that if we're going to repeat a process, we're going to use some kind of loop. In this case, a for loop would be great because we do have a direct number of kind of how many times we do want to do it. And so, okay, we know how to now print out something 5 times. So before we even focus on the numbers, if our question was simply, we have an input 5, print out hello 5 times, then we know, okay, we can just do a for loop and then make that print out 5 times, and it'll be hello, 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 hello. That'll be 5 times. And so that is kind of one statement right there. Another one would be then going over to, okay, how do we make it 1? How do we make it 2 2s, 3 3s, 4 4s, and 5 5s, depending on the input? And that is almost a different whole problem in itself. Imagine you got a problem that says, okay, given input 5, print out a string with 5 5s, or given an input 6, print out a string with 6 6s. And so almost you could almost spread those out into 2 different problems, and therefore I feel like this is a great candidate for one of those helper functions within our main function. And so let's go ahead and build this one out. We're going to call it, let's call it print nums. Yeah, print nums. So I'll do it right over here. Probably going to be in your way a little bit. Nums, and we're going to have a number. And we're going to do this in JavaScript, by the way. Okay, so we're going to print a number. It depends on 5, it depends on the num, our input. And so we already decided, okay, we're going to repeat these processes. So let's put that in a for loop. And so for I equals, and now we decide, okay, when do we want to start? If we know that in our case, hypothetically, if we get a 0, we're not going to do anything. And so how do we not even account for 0? Let's do, or let's start at the the 1. I guess, well, actually, this starting at the 0, the 1, that really depends on your case in the middle here, but we'll continue along with it. And I is, as long as I is less than or equal to num, and I plus plus. And so this will ensure that if it is, say we get a 1, we're going to at least do it 1 time. That could have been 0, and then we could have gotten rid of that equal sign, so that's up to you. And so if we get a 1, we're going to guarantee that we're going to go through this 1 time at least, because I will be 1, I will be less than, since it'll be equal to 1, we will go through the for loop 1 time, I will increment. Now 2 is now less than or equal to 1, given our input if it was 1, and therefore we're going to cut out of the for loop. And so in terms of this function in itself, it asks us to print things out, so we know that we're not going to really need to return anything. And so we know that the chunk of our printing action is going to be within this for loop. And so from here, we can just print it out and then end the for loop and end the function. And so for each of that, what do we want to do? We want to console log something. And the thing that we do want to console log, we want to console log now this string that was created. And so let's pretend that we have that string created. Let's even pretend like it's just hello. And if we ended at that point, we would have, it would say 5, and we would just have 5 hellos. And so instead of doing that, what we want to do is we want to create, or actually no, we'll just have 1 hello, but we're going to have it 5 times. So we'll have hello, 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 like that. And so instead of printing out hello for each line, we want to know how to create these strings now. And so in order to do that, I feel as if that's a whole nother problem, like I said. And so let's break this out into a helper function. And instead of printing out hello, we're going to print out the return of this helper function we're going to create. And so we're going to call that make string. And make string is going to take in a num, and we're going to make that I. And so why do we make that I? Well, because make string is going to be a very simple helper function that is only going to create 1 string at a time. So its job is ever only to make 1 string. And I think I could fit it right in here. So let's go ahead and try that. So let's call this, and I like being on this side, let make string. And we're going to take a num. We could call this num again. It doesn't matter that these arguments are the same words. We're going to take a num, and what we're going to do now is we're going to again use a for loop, because depending on our num is how long we want our kind of number to be. And so we want that to be as long as the num. If we got a 1, we're just going to return the 1. If we got a 2 as our num, so assuming that in this for loop, the 1 has already been created. Now, if the I increments to 2, we got to make this string now. And so how do we make that 2? We're going to, again, use the for loop method. And so how do we do that? We know that we're going to want to take advantage of the num itself, because we don't want to increment the num. We don't want to make the string 1, 2, 3. We want it to be 3, 3, 3. So we want to use a num. And we also want to make it a string. So let's go ahead and create a variable of just an empty string that we can utilize later. So that's an empty string right there, and let's go ahead and create our for loop. And so let's see, this is going to be, we're going to have to create our loop num times, and so let's start it at 0. This time let's start it at 0, and I is less than num, and I plus plus. And so once we do that, we're going to do a string plus equals num, end it there, and return num. And so essentially, this is actually already in its final stages. We're already done, actually. Let's go over this helper function once real quick, and then tie it back into how it works here. Actually, let's run through this first. If we're given this situation, we're given a 1, our num is 1, and we want the entire, this is our main function, we want this guy to print out just a 1. And so how does it do that? It goes through our loop, does I, our I starts at 1, is I, which is 1, less than or equal to our argument num, which is 1. And since it is, we go into the function and we console log the return value of this helper function. This helper function is right here, and our I currently is a 1. And so what will happen is we have this empty string that's initiated, and then we have this for loop that will go I is 0. Since 0 is less than our num, which was 1, we'll do a string plus equals our num, which means the string at this point equals a 1 like that. And so now I will increment, I will also be 1 now. And since 1 is not less than 1, we're going to end the for loop and return num, which is wrong. We want to return the string. Because we did all this work to build out a string, and then we can't just return num. That's not what we want to do. And so we want to return string at the end there, and this is our string 1. And so that finishes this case. However, let's move on to if the argument in the main function was a 2, then we're not done yet. I increments, and now I is 2 less than or equal to, so if this guy was 2 to begin with, I is now 2, and I is now 2, and now num is 2, and since those are equal, we're going to go into this function again, or into this for loop, console log whatever make string of I is, and I right now is a 2, and so now our num is 2. Let's write it out over here. Our num is 2, and our string is just an empty string. And so let's do this. I is 0 less than 2. Yes, the string plus equals our num. And so now our string is a 2 string. But, and let's see, I goes from 0 to a 1 since it incremented. And so now is 1 less than num, is 1 less than 2? Yes, it is. And so string will plus equal num again. And so we're going to see how num never changed. That's why we're using num. Now that's a 2, 2, 2. And I increments over here. That's a 2 now. And now, okay, is 2 less than 2? No, that's false. So we return our string, which is this guy right here. And so that is 2, 2. And we return, we console log pretty much the return of this function, which was 2, 2. And in the end, if our argument was 2, we already solved for the 1 case, and now we solve for a 2 case. We know that it'll work for the rest of them also. And so let me get out of your way so that you can see it properly in one shot. Our main function here, we utilize the fact that we can use helper functions to break down the formula. We can definitely, I mean, this is not too much to kind of have it within this for loop. However, if you can break it down, not only does it prove that you know how to use helper functions and stuff, but it makes it a lot cleaner. It also makes it a lot easier to just think about it too in terms of strategy. And so we use the main function here. We console logged our helper function, the return of our helper function, which is right here. Make string in our helper function, we took the argument, we had an empty string, and we added to that empty string of the num amount of times. In the end, we returned the string, which we end up console logging, which solves our case here, where we want to console log a pattern that looks like this. Cool, and so that was the question, Iris. Hopefully this helps, and hopefully this helps other people also. This is definitely in the realms of string manipulations. You kind of also have to know this trick where you can add something to the string and it'll stay as string. So it comes with a little bit in the string manipulation and knowing kind of how to utilize your for loops the best way possible. Okay, so that was it. Hopefully this helps, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll catch you in the next one.